and restructuring. But I think we're getting in reactions. Karan Tarani of Dalit Capital is here with us. Karan, how would you read Wipro's numbers?
The numbers are weak on the revenue front. The margin expansion in the IT services part is a bit of a positive surprise, but wouldn't read much into that. It's the growth which has been a major issue for Wipro. And if you see in the last quarter as well, they were not able to achieve the upper end of the guidance. And this quarter too, it's a decline if you remove the inorganic component. And even despite S2 being seasonally strong, you have this quarter which is about a flattish or a negative growth, and next quarter would be about half to 1% kind of growth. So clearly signs of trouble signs basically, and we don't expect more than 4 to 5% kind of revenue growth on a CC basis for Wipro for FY17.
What do you make of you just spoke about the guidance front? What was your expectation as far as the guidance for Q4 is concerned, Karan?
So we're expecting somewhere in the range of 2 to 4%, given Q3 and Q4 are seasonally strong for Wipro.
And given the fact that it's 1 to 2%, do you expect to change your outlook on Wipro, or do you expect to change your ratings on Wipro at this point?
So we already have a reduced rating on the stock, and probably will continue to maintain that. There may be some kind of revision downward in the estimate front because of the revenue growth concern which is there.
Sanjeev Hussain, in fact, of IFL is also joining in. Sanjeev, what do you make of the numbers? Bit of a positive as far as the margins are concerned, but as Karan was pointing out, the revenue miss seems to be the big disappointment.
Yeah, so two things. We know that they have already guided that this would have been a slightly lukewarm quarter. We have to see how the Aprio acquisition plays out, because that would be the inorganic way, and they've spent a lot of money, and that is a very, very EPS accretive acquisition which they've done. So we think that given that BFSI space is a lag, I think on the telecoms side, one of their verticals should start to do well. We think the stock at, it quotes at something like 11-12 times the cheapest Wipro has been in the last 3 years. So we have an accumulate closer to this 470 for a 15% upside, given that a large part of the rhetoric as far as H1 visa and corporate spending should be resolved, and we should see some sort of uptick coming there. Also, we think the Aprio numbers, the acquisition could play out positively in the next few quarters as the realigning starts to take place. So for now, I think the numbers are in line with what our targets were. Like you said, the volumes are slightly lower, but the margins have met, and the net profit is slightly above what we had as an estimate.
Okay. By the way, some internals, all the verticals or the strategic business units of the company have reported a decline in revenue, barring the energy vertical. But again, for energy, although it's an important vertical for the company, it has shown a decline for the last 7 quarters. So it's after 7 quarters of a successive decline in their energy revenues, and on a dollar basis, energy has managed to show you some amount of growth. So that is the only vertical which is up. I think it's up about 0.3%. So that again is not saying much. The rest of the verticals, whether it's finance, whether it's manufacturing or telecom, healthcare, they've all reported a decline. So it's a secular miss that you would see on the top line for Wipro. Even in terms of the geographies, it's America which has done relatively better. America has been doing relatively better for the company. It's largely been outperforming the company growth rate. This time too, it's a growth of about 0.7%. Europe has declined by 2.3%. India and Middle East is down nearly 5%. And the APAC and other emerging market region is also down close to about 0.5%. Sarabjit Kour Nangra of Angel Broking also joins us on the show. Sarabjit, how do you square in the Q3 performance, the Q4 guidance, considering that the Aprio acquisition would have contributed to some extent for both these quarters, and therefore the organic trend of Wipro appears to be very disappointing?
Yeah, actually what you're saying is right. Actually, it's Wipro has been continuously disappointing in spite of acquisitions. Actually, we believe that at least Wipro, if not doing organically anything great, it's done quite a good acquisition. So probably that would contribute. So that's a bit disappointing given acquisitions are good, and possibly, and given the fact that Wipro tends to disappoint and always remain closer to the lower range of its guidance. Tends to be worrisome. Rest vertical, they have been managing it pretty well, be it diversification of their geography or services. So they have done fairly de-risked that part of it. Margin profiles quarter on quarter has been showing some at least steadiness and good traction there. So it's only volume I think which is left, and the growth part which is left. I think that will be interesting to see their take on it. And Q4 suggests that possibly this year is gonna be a waste year as far as Wipro is concerned in terms of growth. So I guess this year Wipro has disappointed sadly, but on the positive sides they have maintained the profitability and other metrics pretty well. So I guess if next year we see some of these acquisitions doing fairly well or contributing on the growth part, I think that will be the only silver lining I can see, because that's the only variable in the overall equation that's missing right now in Wipro.
Sanjeev, come in on this. When do you expect acquisitions to actually show in concrete number terms into the top line?
Well, I would think from the, just one more quarter and after that, because like you said, I meant to say that aside from telecom, even their energy and healthcare, these three verticals are where there has been some mispricing. That can actually pick up, because we've seen the worst of most of the healthcare and energy play out. Energy is now on a much bigger ticket, and I think Aprio fits in right in there, in a perfect spot. So you will have to take this, because what has happened is the stock also has been an underperformer. Even in any rally, it's not joining in, and that is giving you ample room that given the history of how Wipro has been, it flatters to deceive. But we think that going forward after this acquisition, you should actually see this stock get re-rated on the upside from the second half of FY17.
The second half of FY17. Would you agree to that timeline, Sarabjit, or do you think it will take longer?
I think probably my eyes actually more or so I've seen the traction so far with acquisitions. I'll gauge probably next year as the year to look out in Wipro, I think so. So yeah, FY18 is the year I'm looking forward to in Wipro actually.
Karan, should we expect any cuts in the EPS estimates, and what could be the stock reaction in Friday's trade, considering the stock has already been an underperformer compared to its peers?
So we could expect cut in terms of the EPS to the range of about 3 to 4% given the weak revenue growth. If you see clearly, our perspective has been that the dollar revenue growth has been in the range of about, the constant currency growth has been in the range of about 5 to 6%. And if you exclude the HPS impact and the recent acquisition which they have done, organically they are growing at about 1 to 2% as compared to peers like Infosys and HCL Tech, which are growing organically in the range of 7 to 9%. And even going ahead in terms of FY18, the environment doesn't seem to be any positive. So we don't see any high growth for Infy and HCL Tech. So growth rates for Wipro will continue to remain low in this kind of range organically going ahead as well, because the industry overall is under pressure. And in terms of stock price movement for tomorrow, we don't expect much downside, because the valuations are already cheap and they will remain at these kind of levels.
Yes, indeed. The constant currency growth on a year-on-year basis has been consistently deteriorating. This quarter, we highlighted how it's up 0.6% QOQ. On a year-on-year basis, the constant currency growth is at 6.2%, which would compare with 7.2% a quarter ago, which would compare with 9.5% in Q1 of FY17. So the constant currency growth on a year-on-year basis has been consistently coming down for Wipro despite the inorganic initiatives. And although the valuations are very reasonable for Wipro and much lower than what the peers are operating at, the stock is only at 12.5, 13 times forward FY18 PE. But till you see some acceleration in revenues, it's very hard to imagine the valuations catching up to its peers.
We've been saying this exact same line for the last
so many quarters,
4 quarters, that Rima and I have been sitting here saying the exact same thing. So I think we would look at this with more caution. But very quickly, the same question that Rima asked to the other guests as well. Sanjeev, what is the stock? Do you expect the stock has already taken in the valuation at this point? Could there be a further derating by tomorrow?
Well, like I said, I don't see the price point or as far as I don't see any further weakness into the stock. You could see a momentarily a 2% or a 2.5% downside which can be bought into. What you have to see is these are huge cash-rich companies which are looking for churn. There is the process of reutilizing the cash on acquisitions, and we think a large part of the rhetoric on the negative side, both as far as the H1 visa and corporate spending in the US may have been the past, and we think the road ahead both should be positively viewed going into the swearing in and how they make out on the back that huge stimuluses are being talked about over there. So I don't see any reason. I think the US should be one of the better performing markets, and since they have a huge presence there, they should be also be getting a bigger proportion of the pie when the tide turns there. So for us, Wipro, we have a buy on our top pick is TCS, HCL Tech, and Mindtree in that order. But Wipro is an add on any declines at these levels of 460 to 470.
Sarabjit, do you concur that despite the numbers being weak, the downside could be protected because of the valuations that the stock is trading at?
I believe that as of now, Wipro is definitely being an underperformer given the valuations. Yeah, fundamentally there is no reason. But I think if such performance or such language continues for an outlook for the next year, I think if management happens to speak today about any outlook for the next year, probably I think that will be testing patience, and stock probably could have a dip, I think so, because I think investors it's discounted most of the negatives, but I think investors are patiently waiting that growth outlook also improves in the stock, and I guess if that doesn't or the language doesn't seems positive that it will come in FY18 also, I think there will be a dip in the stock, even though fundamentally it's actually attractively valued. There shouldn't be a downside given that they have potential to raise dividends and payouts could increase, and since they have committed to utilizing cash in a better way and giving it back to shareholder either through inorganic route or through dividends. So I guess there is a floor, and definitely fundamentally there's a floor, definitely.
Wipro has actually announced an acquisition as well today. They've acquired InfoServer, which is a specialized IT services provider for banking, financial services and insurance. The deal is done at 27.6 million, $8.7 million. It's a very small acquisition. It's a niche acquisition that they're looking at. Moshe Khatri is joining in on the phone line. Moshe, the fact of the matter is that Wipro has been making niche to large to mid-sized acquisitions, but we haven't really seen the numbers or the benefits of that trickle in a big sense into the top line. By when would you expect to see turnaround as far as Wipro's numbers are concerned, and the acquisitions actually making a sizable difference there?
It's a good question, and the verdict is still out there. The company has underperformed compared to its peers in the past few years in terms of revenue growth. So another quarter with soft revenue growth in IT services. The guidance seems to be also below expectations. So I think a lot of this in their case revolves around what's going on with the legacy base that continues to shrink. And then the flip side of it, how quickly can we see a digital business growing faster that's going to be able to offset the shrinkage from the legacy business? So I don't know what we're going to see that recovery, just given the fact that Wipro has underperformed in the past few years versus its peers.
So no signs of recovery just yet for Wipro, Moshe?
Look, they're winning deals, right? The challenge here is to convert that into revenue growth, and that has not been the case. We've definitely seen that disconnect. So, no, we're not seeing it yet.
Okay. Anything else that stood out for you in the quarter gone by for Wipro that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this by the verticals, the two verticals in constant currency that did the best were energy, which is not a big surprise, and financial services. Everything else was pretty much either kind of flattish or maybe even slightly down. And then by regions, Middle East and India was down about 4% and change. And this is where I'm assuming that kind of impacted growth as well.
Why do you think, Moshe, that it hasn't translated? If they are winning deals and if they are doing some things right, what's the gap as to why it hasn't translated into revenues?
Sure, it's all about the legacy piece, right? So if legacy shrinks much faster than expected, that pretty much weighs on the results. And then on top of that, the real question here is that whether the new deal flow that comes on board does have some legacy piece that also shrinks. These are the two things that kind of get you that disconnect that we're talking about.
Okay, we're completely out of time. Any other closing points to make, Reema?
No, on the whole, this is another disappointing performance for Wipro. Again, lacking compared to peers. And when you compare it to expectations in the top line, the company has reported a dollar revenue decline of 0.7% in constant currency. It's only a growth of close to about 0.6%. And their guidance for Q4 is also lacking at 1 to 2%. So we suspect the stock could be under pressure in Friday's trade.
All right, thanks, Reema, Sanjeev Bhasin, Sarabjit Kour, Karan Tarani, as well as Moshe for joining in on the show. We are completely out of time. We'll have to slip into a very quick commercial break. News and updates will continue on the other side. Stay right there.